Happening now, we want to welcome our viewers from across the United States and around the world. This is the EdTech Situation Room. Good morning, good day, good evening. It is episode number 100 of the EdTech Situation Room on Wednesday, July 11th, 2018. My name is Jason Neifer, and I am the Assistant Director and Curriculum Director of the Montana Digital Academy, the state virtual school located on the University of Montana campus in fabulous Missoula, Montana. But I am joining you tonight from my parents' basement of all places. I am taking on every ridiculous nerdy meme I can. I'm a guy sitting in my parents' basement podcasting. So here we are. We've got some paneling. It's very parent basement-y, and I am in Great Falls, Montana tonight visiting family. And joining me as always, Dr. Wes Fryer. Good evening, Wes. Are you in your parents' basement tonight?
Good evening, Jason. No, I am not. I actually was in my parents' basement for my first international podcast Skype excitement, years ago, back in 2005. But I am at home in my dining room. So I am the Chief Technology Fear Therapist at the Cassidy School in Oklahoma City, where I also serve as a lead digital servant. And I am kind of catching my breath. We rolled out a voice over IP phone system in June, and that was huge. We were in weekly meetings with our company every Tuesday at 2 p.m. for the past 8 months, and wow, that is great that that's coming to closure, but we're having a lot of other things going on, including moving all of our servers and extending our DMARC next Friday and moving my office and doing fun things in addition to the regular sorts of summer activities, but had definitely some good times on vacation. And I know that you did quite a bit of learning at ISTE, and we have a heck of a lineup tonight with articles, which I'm sure we will not completely get through, but I'm excited to be back on the show. And for the record, I'm not going for the Buddy Holly look again. This is just my old glasses. I'm officially going to be old and 48 this August, and the situation is such that it's time for bifocals, and I had to give up my frames for about 2 weeks to get those. So there you go.
Well, lots to talk about. I think we should go ahead, and we haven't had an opportunity to chat post-ISTE, and unfortunately, Wes didn't get to go this year, although you've been busy traveling around with family and workshopping. I did get a chance to go this year, and first, a shout-out. I had at least 6 people find me. 2 of them recognized me by my voice, which is just mind-blowing to me, and said hello. So shout out to all that I got a chance to talk to in the halls, and then also a couple of people at the State Educational Technology Directors Association conference, which was right before ISTE. ISTE was the same conference it always is. It was massive, it was crowded, it was chaotic, and I loved it. It was a great opportunity to meet with both friends from across the United States and really internationally, and also meet with a couple of different vendors. And before we jump into that, I do want to make a quick note. It is our 100th episode. For some reason, I thought I would remember that and bring like a little noisemaker or perhaps a party hat. But to be honest, I think I've heard this every single podcast that makes it to 100 episodes says this, but I'm not sure if we started this thinking we get to this point. So it's great to be here. And for those of you that listen, even just once or twice or consistently, thank you for your patronage of our views every week. And although we do this for us in a way, because it's an opportunity for Wes and I each week to talk about educational technology news and work through some issues that's good to talk with another about, we like to connect with you. So if you're enjoying what you hear, give us a review on iTunes or on Stitcher, or if your podcast app allows for reviews, ping us at EdTechSR on Twitter, go to our website, edtechsr.com, and continue on the conversation, because this is how, really podcasting empowers conversation in 2018. Any words of wisdom on our 100th episode, sir?
Well, I think maybe we should dabble in, monetization in some way. I don't know. It's definitely a work of passion and love, and enjoying just, the fact that we get to chat. It's a great weekly opportunity to do that. So anyway, we'll just have to see. Yeah, where will we be in episode 200? I'm gonna write a blog post called "Crossing the Rubicon," and I'm not gonna go into more details than that. I'll get myself in trouble if I start making predictions about where I'll be at episode 200. So I'm not
right.
gonna,
Well,
I'm not gonna say that.
yeah, I would say that in my journey is a little different, but yeah, like I curiously scratch my beard a little bit too about what episode 200 might look like for me too. So, back to ISTE, there's a really great summary at EdSurge on June 29th, and a lot of EdTech companies and major technology companies did release things that week. There was Microsoft Office 365 updates. There's Microsoft education tools like Microsoft Team updates. I was actually bit by that the other day because I noticed I work with a nonprofit that utilizes Microsoft Teams as their kind of conduit of communication, and I got some emails saying I was missing notifications. I was like, well, the app's on my phone, and I realized that there was a big update to Microsoft Teams, the app, and so I had to go in and update the database and restart the app, and then I was able to get notifications again. But Google Classroom has updates. Google has announced updates. Microsoft Teams has updates. All of the major players, Smart, Lenovo, a couple of the major kind of platform providers announced updates. Schoology was very present at ISTE, as was Lenovo and Google, and Apple was present, but not as much on the floor as they were in training rooms. There's kind of a whole wing full of kind of Appleites that were training there, as did Microsoft and also Google. So it was kind of the same stuff there. If you don't mind indulging me a bit, Wes, I do have a couple of interesting things that I did see there. The first one is, and I have this under the Google links, I talked to Chromebook maker CTL on the vendor floor at ISTE, and I was actually going there to kind of push them a little bit to release Chromebooks that had more powerful chips in it. And what I was asking for was either the M3, N5, M5, M7 chip, or i3, i5, i7 chips, the mobile versions of those chips. I would love to see more, $400 or $500 Chromebooks that have a decently powerful mobile processor and more than 4 gigs of RAM. And what I didn't know about CTL was that they are actually an Oregon-based company, so they're kind of in my neighborhood. And for some reason, I had only briefly even had heard of them before. I had seen them on the list of Chromebooks available on the end of life page, but didn't know much about them. And there's a great article from Chrome Unboxed on June 22nd that shows off something they demoed to me on the floor at ISTE, which is they have a super rugged Chromebook out that they showed me this demo. And there's a picture of this on the article, Chrome Unboxed, of the sales guy actually stood on the Chromebook. Like they put a super, I think it's maybe even carbon fiber, some kind of super strong material, maybe it's aluminum, on top of the Chromebook. It's actually a whiteboard surface, which I think is brilliant. Right? Like it's a little 11-inch Chromebook with this super metal surface on top that's actually a whiteboard surface. And he said this may be kind of cheesy, but we put this whiteboard surface. I said, no, that's brilliant. I love that. Like the fact that you can use it digitally and as an analog whiteboard, I think that's really cool. But he then set it on the ground and jumped on top of it. And might have made the joke. I said, maybe you don't want me to demo that for you there, pal. But it was really impressive, and it felt like a hardy piece of hardware. And so there's a great article about that at Chrome Unboxed. And I think that I'm going to give a little more attention to CTL as a Chromebook maker. And in fact, now looking at the article, I think that the same gentleman that's standing there with his dog on top of the Chromebook is the same gentleman I talked to at ISTE. So just a shout out to CTL on the odd chance they might hear this. I was impressed by the demo. I'm going to look a little more into their product. They were nice, portable Chromebooks. They weren't ultra thin, but at the price point they're selling them at, that's a bit unrealistic. But they were very hardy and seemed like they were very nice platforms to utilize. And then otherwise, the other surprising thing for me at ISTE was the fact that the good folks from Neverware were there with their Cloud Ready product. but they were actually at the Google booth, right? They didn't have their own booth. They had a little Cloud Ready stand amongst the kind of behemoth Google booth. And I mean, we reported several weeks ago here on the podcast that Google had given some seed funding to Neverwhere. They're part of, I think, their latest round of fundraising to help fund their organization. And I clearly thought that there would be a kind of an interesting partnership there. But the two things I've noticed in the last couple of months, first, they refer to Cloud Ready on the Google site now. Like when you search for different ways to get Chromebooks, that's listed as an option now. Like they're accepting it as kind of a way to get cheap Chromebooks in your district. And the fact they had a Cloud Ready booth amongst the kind of Google land, massive presence there is really extraordinary. And the thing that they're reporting here, this is also from Chrome Unboxed on June 19th, was that ISTE was the first of their Bring Your Old Laptop tour, not your Bring Your Own Laptop, Bring Your Old Laptop tour, where people were encouraged to come bring their crappy old laptop, and they would turn it into a relatively speedy Chromium OS device with Cloud Ready. So, obviously there was literally thousands of interesting things to see at ISTE, but those, I seem to be turning into like super Chrome guy, but those are the two things I saw that were most interesting at the conference.
One thing I wondered, not being there, but reading the statistics, was it just crazy full and busy with people? Because it was, that article in EdSurge said over 18,000. I thought I saw a number that said over 20,000. I
wouldn't be surprised if it was over 20. And the thing that, well, first of all, it was at this massive convention center, right, that was insanely large. Like I'd never been to the Chicago Convention Center. It was huge. It had spilled over into the hotel next door. There was ISTE related events at the hotel next door. And I would say, the vendor floor was, it took me 7 hours to get totally through the vendor floor. And I had some targets I was doing there for work. So, part of that was discussions, but it was incredibly intense. And, I will say that, I do, like, as an example of this, there was at least a dozen people that I wanted to see there, that I knew that were there, that I saw on social media were there, friends or acquaintances that I would love even just to high five in the hall, and I never ran into them at all. Like, and I was legit at the conference for 2.5 days, and if you add the vendors into it, it probably hits 25K people, right? There's just not a lot of cities that can host a 25,000 person conference.
Yeah. What were aside from the vendor floor, did you get in on any poster sessions or other sessions that were highlights?
I did stop in fact, based on your advice a couple of years ago, I started paying more attention to poster sessions, because it seems like now, for better or for good reasons, the people that end up in rooms at sessions, they tend to be people that have more polished presentations and are less practitioners. That's just the bottom line, and that's okay, right? I think that's that you want to go to someone that has a polished presentation, that's done it before. The times I've been accepted at ISTE, these were presentations that I could prove to them have been delivered at other conferences successfully. So, they know it's something that's practiced and thought through. But I did stop in 2 of the poster sessions, and I did view mostly student-related demos, which I thought was awesome. A lot of kids running around, talking about interesting things. A lot of interest in like robotics, but not kind of older school robotics. Like it seems like there's a lot of schools that are working with vendors in particular to find ways to make robotics more accessible to more students. And I really wish I'd remembered the name, but I did sit through a demo at the state EdTech Directors Conference with a group that found out a way, or was working on ways to make robots more gender neutral. As an example, they had a couple of movable robots that didn't show big puffy tires, because they said that when kids see robots with big tires on them, they read truck, and they want something that was more gender neutral than that. And so they kind of hid the tires inside the bottom of the robot. And those robotic pieces, are very interesting. I saw a lot of, kind of builder maker kind of stuff. There was several interesting demos with Raspberry Pis and other, one board computers. Those are becoming, that market is becoming almost saturated now. So the price is going down. There's a lot of different folks that are making one board computers that, are good for maker style spaces. I saw a lot of folks that were working on personalization related to technology and ways they're personalizing classrooms. I'm not fully sold on personalization, which I think is kind of a hard discussion to have because people immediately, will be like, well, are you about in-personal learning? Well, no, I just think that we don't have enough pedagogy developed around what that looks like yet, other than allowing kids to go at their own pace. I think there's more research that can be done there and more thought that can be put into that before we can declare it a great model. But great things going on with people using, tools like the Microsoft Education Suite and Google Classroom. And I hear a lot more about Schoology than I did a couple of years ago. And in fact, I know a state virtual school that's actually going to utilize that as their kind of big LMS, which is miles ahead of where Schoology was a couple of years ago. A lot of Canvas chit chat at ISTE this year, which has been growing in its volume. And then, of course, the big players, spent some time in the big Steelcase booth, who has just beautiful furniture for flexible classroom environments. Spendy, but beautiful furniture. Last year I demoed a pod that was basically like a lounge chair with a desk that you pull up, and then you could pull a curtain in and like stick yourself in the pod. And I really wanted one for my office, but cool stuff like that. So a lot of interesting things going on at ISTE this year from presenters and vendors alike.
Awesome. Well, as I mentioned, I'm in the process of moving my office. I'm hearing an echo from you.
Okay.
And there we go. So I may hit you up for your wish list of your Steelcase and things, because I think we actually are going to have an opportunity to perhaps order a few things as we do that. So, well, that was great. As we may have mentioned already, but if not, all of our links are available at edtechsr.com/links. And I am pretty positive that we are not going to be getting through all of these tonight. But anyway, that's the case most nights. So I think there's some really different directions to be able to go with this. Why don't I go ahead and just kind of stick with the product update and go to Microsoft, because I think this is a pretty significant announcement. I guess I could just say on a personal note that I am back in the iOS family with my smartphone. I was able to pick up an iPhone 6 Plus for $120 from my brother-in-law, which is a pretty good buy, and was initially not that pleased on vacation just with battery, but it was because of constant using Google Maps, using Glimpse and things like that, which is going to sap it. So far and away my favorite thing about the Android was having a 5,000 milliamp battery. So, and I'm not necessarily done forever, but anyway, if you want to check that out, I wrote a blog post about some of the things that I've learned. But here's a pretty big announcement on Microsoft. This is from Wired Magazine 2 days ago on July 9th. Surface Go is Microsoft's big bet on a tiny computer future. Now, this is actually going to go for sale in August. So tomorrow at 10 o'clock, I've got an appointment at our local Microsoft store because we have a Surface Book that is in need of some repair. And we have a new staff member that has specifically requested a Microsoft Surface device, and so I anticipate purchasing one. I won't be getting the Surface Go, but what they've basically done with this device, and it does start. I need to make sure I get the price right. For taking most of the features of the $1,000 plus device. The first one, and it's tiny. It says it measures 9.6 by 6 by 9 inches by a third of an inch. And it has a 10-inch display. It weighs 1.15 pounds, and yeah, $400. It starts at $399 for 4 gigs of RAM and 64 gigs of extra internal storage. This made me think of ISTE with the RT tablets. I don't know if you attended. Was that in Philadelphia a few years ago when Microsoft was giving those away? I think that might have been in 2013. It was right before I think I went back in the classroom. You had to have the signature of a technology director, supposedly, to say that this was going to a school and it wasn't going to go to use an individual. But that was not an impressively performing tablet. But Uh, just like you mentioned with the Chromebooks and is it CTL? I saw them at the Atlas conference in April in Washington, D.C., and I was impressed with them as well. And it stuck out that they're an Oregon-based company. It's just great to see folks innovating, with different kinds of hardware. So I am excited to see Microsoft continuing to improve. I will comment that, as I think I've talked about before, we've had reliability, huge bad reliability issues with some Surface Books, and we've had devices that have had to be actually hardware replaced 3 times in one case, and just they haven't been the performers that we've needed them to be. But I'm excited to see Microsoft, continuing to innovate, and Microsoft has really turned the corner, I think, in terms of innovation. I might have said this last time on the show, but we're going to take the jump to Minecraft EDU, the full, new version this next year, and we've worked out a funding mechanism for that for all of our middle school students. That means that we're going to, our IT department will have to support at least the free tier of Microsoft 365. Which I'm not anticipating, going for more than that. But anyway, I'm glad to see Microsoft innovating. So Jason, are you ready to rush out and get a Surface Go and give up your Pixel Book?
Well, two thoughts related to that. The first one is that it's funny you should mention Surface Book problems, because that's my main work computer. I've got a 4-year-old iMac at work, and then I have a 1-year-old Surface Book. It's the one with the performance base, and so it's got an integrated graphics card and stuff. And mine just died a week ago, like just straight up and died. There was an update installed that restarted, and then it couldn't see the hard drive anymore. So luckily, I was a week and a half out from my warranty ending, so I was able to get it back. And actually the sending it back part was pretty effortless. And luckily I don't need it right now. And in fact, my office is literally closed due to asbestos abatement. So it doesn't matter at this point for me, but and I've personally bought this Pixel Book, but I'll see, right? Like I like the piece of hardware. I think it's a good laptop, but I think I mentioned this earlier that it slowed down pretty significantly 2 or 3 months into my usage, and I was concerned and thought it was, that it was not a kind of a good deal. And as it turns out, all I needed to do was just install Windows from scratch, and it found all the drivers, and it was literally 3 times faster by benchmark and by usage feel. So I think Microsoft's headed in the generally right direction, but it's just interesting to hear that you're taking a Surface Book back. My Surface Book went back. I have some friends that are Surface Pro 3 and 4 users that have had a mixed result there. And when Microsoft takes on the hardware manufacturing, it's not just about the software anymore. That's part of what schools are going to look for, is that if 30% of your X product ends up being borked somehow, then that's an issue. That's going to be IT people saying we got to go somewhere else. So
absolutely, we're sticking with Macs for that reason. As far as just the 5-year plus longevity, we're getting great return on investment on those devices.
Well, and as it turns out, too, my personal experience with Apple is that I never had a butterfly keyboard, so I can't speak to that issue. But I've literally dropped an iPad and cracked it into 13 pieces, and for $50 walked out with a brand new one an hour later. So I feel like when I was an Apple customer, I do feel like they're not innovating like I need them to, which is why I'm using other platforms now. But from a service standpoint, I always felt like that was a top-notch piece of the Apple experience. About this Surface, or this new Surface tablet, the hardware looks nice. I think Surface Pro 4s are beautiful pieces of hardware. I like them. I think they look like they're interesting and useful. I just still don't get a tablet with Windows 10 on it being the productivity that someone needs to be successful, right? And part of it is that, what makes the iPad so compelling, in my humble opinion, is that it's software that is really light. So everything works lightning fast on that environment, right? Like that's the reason why the iPad works as a long-term device. And I think that's true about schools. Whereas, Windows 10, even when you have it in so-called tablet mode. And technically with my Surface Book, I have a Windows tablet, a big, beautiful Windows tablet. But I almost never use it in tablet mode because I really, it's just the desktop software that I think is the draw for that platform. So I'm curious to see, but and if it ends up being an interesting, like super mobile device, where people can feel like they can get stuff done on it more than just tablet stuff, I think that could be compelling. But I am really curious to see what the market does with that.
One quick related thing that I'll mention is we're in the process this summer, pardon me, of going ahead and moving all of our Windows 7 devices up to Windows 10. We do have one teacher who loves her Windows 8 and just doesn't want to change. It's easier to just say, okay, you just stick with that for now. But I'm going to be really interested to see how that goes. Microsoft has changed their approach, their cost, pricing structure, everything as far as Windows 10. They pretty much want everybody to be on Windows 10. I think our upgrade path is going to probably be updating those from 7 to 10, and then within 10 doing a wipe and a restore, because you can, I guess, do that, from inside 10. We've been looking at different imaging solutions and things like that. In fact, we've been looking at FileWave, and we had a webinar, and we've had different, things that we've been looking at because, imaging, it ain't what you used to be. I mean, Apple has changed that with the new file structure that they have for their hard drives with High Sierra. You can't do legacy imaging, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I'll report more on some of those things that we find and what that looks like. But, I'm definitely not the Microsoft fanboy, but I am glad to see them innovating. And, we've got different folks to support who are using different platforms. So we shall see, and hopefully they're going to get better on that reliability end, because that's huge for
right.
us.
I want to talk about tablets for 1 second because it does inspire another article that I threw into the mix this week. The Washington Post reports on July 5th that Amazon continues to increase tablet sales dramatically, right? And while almost every other tablet form factor and manufacturer and operating system is just not keeping up because the demand isn't there, people are, buying Amazon tablets. And to be clear, I mean, I own a Fire 7, I think, because it was $30 when I bought it 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago. And it's the perfect, no tablet, right? Like I can watch Hulu on it. I can watch Netflix. I can watch my home Plex server on it, and it's super easy. But that article is worth reading through, and it kind of inspires a discussion that I think, Wes, you'll be interested in having related to what you're doing with your tablet, right? Like, I think one of the things that's become a problem with tablets is that, and I also think this is true of smartphones, and I have a broader argument that I have to make at some point that probably isn't cooked enough to talk about tonight. But like, one of the things with tablets is that you don't need a high-end tablet if all you're going to do is passively consume information. And one of the things that Washington Post article does a good job about is that one of the things that those Fire tablets do really well, whether you have the little 7-inch one or the admittedly much more beautiful 10-inch one, is that it doesn't really matter that it doesn't have the big app store on it, because you can get almost all commercially available video via the Amazon app store, right? So they become like little mini TVs for under $100 that you can carry around your house, and you can drop, and the dog can jump up and down on, and your kids can slam against a wall. It doesn't matter. Whereas, that's that $400 Surface tablet, a $350 to $800 iPad, or even the beautiful few remaining Android tablets that are available, or even 2-in-1s or 4-in-1s, is I guess what they call this Pixel Book. Like, if you're passively, utilizing the tablet only to read or listen or watch, then it probably isn't worth anything more than $100 to pay for that. So I thought that was an interesting article. But, Wes, one of your advocacy points is that you could be using the iPad to make things, right? And that does require a slightly more beefy tablet to do so.
Absolutely. And then in school, we need to be focused on the creation of media, the creation of content, interaction. This idea of passive delivery, is an element of learning, but it is not the whole enchilada. And in fact, if we want to get into any kind of discussions about engagement and what authentic learning is, I think we're going to have to talk about students being able to create content and being able to create meaning in doing far more than watching. So that brings to mind two things. The latest This Week in Tech podcast, actually from last week, had an absolutely fascinating discussion about the future of retail and specifically Amazon. With Toys R Us completely out of business now, we're probably going to see Amazon do an unprecedented push for Christmas in terms of toy sales. They've got Whole Foods as a footprint. They just purchased an online prescription company, and so they are going to be making inroads into that. They've started their own insurance company, right, for medical, just for the Amazon employees. But I mean, Jeff Bezos, as they say, just kind of wants 1% of every transaction that's happening on the planet. But I think that has to feed into this as well. What is the pedagogy of Amazon? Amazon's pedagogy is to get us to buy things and to present us with products and to get us to consume, right? Amazon really doesn't have a pedagogy that involves, producing and creating. Certainly the way that Apple does and always has. And I would argue, Google, as far as their support with Google Classroom and G Suite and Google Apps, I mean, very much about creation, collaboration, being able to be productive. And so these are not tablets for productivity, but that is a pretty interesting article. And consumption is a big deal, right? Televisions have been huge for a long, long time, and people tend to favor a consumptive media posture, over a creative one. And that's part of what we need to do as educational technologists and just learning, learning folks, educators is trying to advocate for that kind of pedagogy and say that the kinds of devices that we're purchasing in school and that we're going to utilize need to do far more than deliver.
Agreed, totally. I think it's your turn. Where should we go next, sir?
All right, well, let's take a little turn here. Wired yesterday, July 10th, a landmark legal shift opens Pandora's box for DIY guns. This is absolutely fascinating because this 25-year-old 5 years ago was in law school, and he had created what was touted as the world's first fully printable 3D printable gun. So you could just download this, get some ammunition, throw it in, and you have a gun, and he that works. And he had an anarchist video manifesto, and he ended up challenging this in court. What the federal government tried to do was use a, quote, obscure set of U.S. regulations known as the International Trade in Arms Regulations. He was accused of exporting weapons without a license, just as if he'd shipped his plastic gun to Mexico, rather than put a digital version of it on the internet. And I won't read more from the article, but basically the court case brought both the First Amendment for free speech and the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, together. And this whole idea of code being speech was affirmed by the court. Now, the U.S. federal court actually settled with him. And so what he's able to do now is go crazy with not only as many designs as he wants, but the main way his company is making money is with a 3D milling device. And so they talk about, they've made millions of dollars with this, and it's, I'm trying to see what the actual cost of it is, but it's not just your typical plastic 3D printer. These are actually metal milling machines, but in anybody's garage. Okay, about $1,700, $1,675. They have sold roughly 6,000 of these, and they're called Ghost Runners. And so this is you can make your own AR-15, which is an M16 for civilians. So this is pretty fascinating. This would be a wonderful article to certainly have students write about and talk about in light of the Florida shootings most recently and other kinds of school shootings. The push that we've had for, quote, common sense gun control law. His organization and this guy is a extremist when it comes to wanting to stop all gun control. And so the other thing that's interesting is he's created his own library, and he wants to get federal recognition of his library, because then he'll be able to get access to the Department of Defense's database of all these different kinds of guns. And once they have all those, they're going to be able to create 3D printed and designs that anybody's going to be able to download and use. So I think it's probably fairly dark in terms of the prognosis for the future. If we're going to want to imagine a future where, you know, people who want guns are gonna and shouldn't have guns should not have them, because, you know, this is it's gonna open up it does open up a Pandora's box that has never, you know, been opened to quite this degree, because of limitations that we've had, and literally anybody in their garage with a little over $1,000 worth of stuff, and then the supplies is going to be able to print those. So, thoughts about this, Jason? This is a multifaceted kind of article, I guess, that touches on STEM, ethics, society, school shootings.
Well, and the thing I keep going back to is that, you know, these are inevitable byproducts of empowerment, right? And I don't want to say that as a defense. I'm saying that, you know, in the same way that YouTube brings, you know, extraordinary amounts of interesting and valuable content, it also brings a place for trolls to hang out, right? So, you know, if you open up massive microphones to broadcast to the world, or to share with the world, or to allow the people of the world to build, that doesn't mean that everyone is going to use that in a productive way. And so we've made this point, you know, probably hundreds of times in our 100 episodes, but that's part of the reason why we have to teach productive uses of technology in schools, right? Like, it's not just you know, shady and you know, darkened corners of the world that is going to do bad things with this stuff. Like, we have to teach people these are empowerment technologies too, in a positive way. But I thought the whole thing to be somewhat fascinating too, and you know, in the same way, you probably remember this from 25 years ago when everyone was hand-wringing about the Anarchist Cookbook. It was an internet phenomenon in the 1990s where some document that was probably, you know, at that point 15 or 20 years old, and it talked about all sorts of kind of secret dark things, like how to make your own LSD and how to make explosives and how to do all these terrible things. I mean, that was an argument for not having the internet in schools 20 years ago, right? Well, 25 years ago, because, you know, you'll give, like, anyone can publish on the internet. Well, as it turns out, that's true, right? Like, that's become a true statement in regards to our access of technology. So, you know, we got past that by proving that it can host you know, the Smithsonian along with the Anarchist Cookbook. Well, we also need to be really clear that there's been some YouTube channels I've really taken a liking to over the last 2 weeks, and they're ridiculous but awesome. One of them is this guy tests out MREs. Like, that's just what he does. It's an MRE review channel, and, you know, one day it's you know, a Chinese Red Army modern MRE that he can barely figure out what the food is because he can't read the language, to, you know, a World War II era, you know, emergency cookie ration that he usually tries if it's not obviously bad for him to do so, but. Like, it's awesome. Like, and there's, you know, there's the guys, I think, has several 100,000 subscribers to his channel, but that's, you know, that's not something that would have made it onto commercial television.
It's the long tail, right? That's
yeah, right.
And in the long tail, that we would not have seen that niche of media, and that who knew that there was an audience for that. It did not, could not have existed through the internet.
Well, and there's a gentleman in New Jersey that he only has 30,000 followers, but every day he posts a video about him refurbishing an old tool. And so he takes these, you know, literally 100-year-old wrenches that are all rusted up, and he refurbishes them into these beautiful, essentially brand new, you know, tools that he keeps as part of his library. And again, no commercial value to that, but man, is it interesting to watch, right? Like, in the same way that the stuff they used to put on in the middle of the night on public television was super interesting to watch. But, you know, that comes with, you know, white supremacy that thrives on YouTube, and other, you know, dastardly forces that we have to be, you know, careful about. So it's all about that. You know, it's happened very quickly. There's been no other time in history where we've had such a extraordinary change in the way we relate to one another, we publish information. So schools, you're at the front lines of this. So let's use these technologies and teach them as a positive, proactive tool, and not just a place to go and hide and spew your negativity.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Let's do a little bit of safety chat, because there are a lot of interesting things happened this week. There was a fascinating article that kind of talked about some interesting pieces, but this is the Washington Post on July 3rd. It's about apparently in the journalist gift bag at the North Korea United States Summit in Singapore, they gave away in the journalist bag a little like USB fan, and I didn't catch from the article if it was kind of a joke about how hot Singapore can be, um, but they were telling the article basically talks about this. Security experts say never put a USB device in your computer that you don't know the origin of, right? Like under any circumstances. And that was super interesting to me as part of that. But there are also great security articles where people have done tests where they'll put, rogue USB drives that look like they've been run over by a tire in like credit union parking lots, and 60% of employees that pick up those stick them right into their work computer.
Some of the biggest breaches, in terms of military breaches have happened because of that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Stuxnet did in Iran, but there's definitely been some U.S. military breaches that have happened as a result of that. And the military has really cracked down as far as, your ability to even have a USB drive, I think, around computers. I think they've got them not just taped over, but, they've taken pretty strong measures to stop USB as a technology being available for that. Right.
Well, and it instantly creates insecure data, and people can also take USB devices and launch the most terrible attacks, data thefts, and otherwise computer issues. And then I also threw in, because it was somewhat related, because the notion of USB, July 5th, USA Today reports, don't erase your hard drive or your USB flash drive and then lose it or throw it away or recycle it, because it turns out most times erasing doesn't take the data off of the flash memory, and it's easy to go and recover that data. And so the one I keep thinking about is, if you're in a school and you ever stick a flash drive in your computer, you put student data on there. Not that it's completely impossible if you have someone's physical laptop to get data off of that if you're not encrypting your drive, but which almost no people do. But you're creating essentially a tiny piece of FERPA risk, right? So be super conscious about that. And I of administrators that have been well, in one case fired because they had ported around student data that then got repurposed in an inappropriate way because they weren't conscious of a flash drive. So that technology is very convenient, but there's risks in a number of different ways with that particular method. Cloud is way safer there in a variety of ways.
And think about taxes. I don't know if you're sending taxes via email to an accountant or sending tax documents, but those things should be encrypted, not just sent as standard attachments, via your email. And then our accountant has favored USB, and so handing that, and I'm thinking about that right now. Like, okay, yeah, I've got a few USB sticks that we've used for tax time, and I should do something destructive with those, and probably actually set them aside and just not be ignorant of what flash drives have been used for that kind of confidential information, if you think about the importance of tax information.
Absolutely. So yeah, a couple interesting articles from USB land.
Yeah. Here's a quick one. So under our social media prompt, also from the Washington Post, this was July 6th. Twitter is sweeping out fake accounts like never before, putting user growth at risk. In some cases, deleting up to 70 million, maybe even 100 million accounts a day. Getting aggressive with that. I'm really glad to see that. We've talked at length on the show. We talked about Cambridge Analytica, months and months before, the pink-haired guy came forward, and that became kind of a household name in terms of the election hacking. I'm glad to see this. I think that as well as Facebook stepping up, Twitter needs to be stepping up as well. I had a good conversation with our debate coach and IT staff member, Tommy Snyder, this week about Facebook and the way that they've stepped up election-wise. And I didn't, I think, delve into this as much as I needed to. We just had primary elections, and Oklahoma voted for medical marijuana, among other things. But evidently, they're doing a nice job putting you in contact with your candidates for even local kinds of races, not just federal senators, representatives, and things like that. So I'm glad to see Twitter addressing that, but I'm also overall very pessimistic about our potential to stem the flood of, distractions and manipulations that are probably going to, continue, maybe not abated but much. But anyway, Twitter's trying. So.
It's funny you should mention Facebook and the notion of the political pieces regarding that. I don't watch a lot of on-air or cable television because I utilize mostly Netflix and Hulu at home, and so I don't see a lot of commercials. But hanging out at my parents' house, who do watch usually major network television, I've seen 3 airings of a Facebook ad this week where they basically say, listen, we're sorry for what happened, but we're really committed to making Facebook what it should be. And then they show a picture of, the classic "what is Facebook for" answer is baby pictures. So they show this, really cute video of a baby, and like that. It's interesting now that social media, instead of explaining to us how many more places we need it inserted, they really seem to be reinvigorating themselves as a no, we're way more careful than we're letting ourselves off to be. So, I think Twitter, and the other thing is I keep expecting my Twitter followers to go down because I'm told that most people, and I mean, I'm not even a D pluser on Twitter at all, but I've probably got 7,500 followers. I expected 100, maybe 500, maybe 1,000 of those to go away because I don't, know who's, the people that follow me in the middle of the night that I don't recognize the name. I don't go and scrutinize those. So there has been a lot of hand wringing about that because folks that maybe were pumped up by less than legitimate means to get a following, they're losing a third, a half of their followers.
Related article to that under the security tag. This is Wired Magazine on July 9th. The worst cybersecurity breaches of 2018 so far. And to segue from that Facebook comment, I think we've cited articles before where Facebook usership and use is up, after all the hacks, the breaches, the sky is falling articles, the, lock down your stuff, people saying they were going on a Facebook fast, deleting Facebook, etc. Utilization is up, and people are overall yawning at security breaches and a lot of these things that are going on. So this Wired article, goes through what's really pretty scary about this is the Russian grid hacking. It makes me think about, the MREs that you mentioned. And, I don't know at what point this will become realistic, but I would love, and I don't know if this will be possible, but in the next home that we have, to be in a situation where we could have a well and we could have solar and we could have some capability, to be able to have energy without the grid. It is very frightening. And I think you might be mentioning this with your Geek of the Week. I glanced at that as far as a router reset. It should be very frightening to us. The infiltration that has happened, not just in terms of elections and not just in terms of identity theft for individuals, but in terms of the grid, talking about U.S. universities being targeted, data exposures. I mean, this was crazy. We just had one that was highlighted. It was what was this? Well, they've mentioned VPN filter. I don't think it's actually in this article, but somebody just discovered an open database. I think it was called an elastic database or something. And anyway, it was not encrypted, and they did a search and found this. And there were hundreds of millions of records of just about every consumer or every family in the United States that was just open. And it's one of those things where it was closed, but they have no idea how many people had access to that. And so I've thought it's an interesting thing to consider. How could I reset my personal privacy? I don't know that we can get a new social security number. I mean, short of going into a witness protection program, how could you do a reboot and a reset, with a new cell phone number, with new data? Is it even possible? So anyway, people are yawning when it comes to these things because it's the norm. Oh yeah, it's another breach, and even the news media, if it doesn't reach a certain threshold, it's like, oh yeah, I mean, that was a breach. So it's very, very important for us to think about our own personal security. And I'm not going to go, I don't think, down the road of the extreme survivalist, but I listened to, what was that book called? Lights Out by not Brokaw, one of our former news anchors. But anyway.
Was it Jennings?
What's that?
Was it Peter Jennings?
No, let me Google it real quick.
I read this book too.
Yeah, right. I mean, we're getting. Okay, yeah. Lights Out. Cyber attack. No, I'm getting other things. So that West Googling doesn't make for great radio. So sorry about that. Oh, there it is. Ted Koppel. Lights Out. A cyber attack. A nation unprepared. Surviving the aftermath.
Right.
Pretty fast.
Yeah, well, and that book's a couple years old now, right? Like,
oh yeah. There's been lots more intrusions and lots more,
scary stuff under that piece. So
one final one I want to do really fast is for Apple. Apple releases iOS 11.4.1 with USB restricted mode, and so on the topic of Android phones, and my Egypt trip in November was really the main catalyst for wanting to have a phone that possibly could be less open to customs officials and others that might try to suck data off. Apple, if you haven't unlocked your device, I think within a certain amount of time, it will actually prevent a customs official or whoever, from just coming up, putting a USB device or USB, connection into your device and sucking your data off. And so there have been known vulnerabilities that have gone around and customs and security forces have paid for in order to, be able to get data off of devices. And so I think Apple is proceeding in the right direction. I really do think that encryption and the ability to keep things private and secret, and not to just have open back doors to devices. I think all those things are pretty important. So I'm glad to see Apple doing that.
And then I'll add a quick one before we go to the Geeks of the Week, as we're hitting the top of the hour here. A reminder, since I'm apparently the consumer correspondent for the EdTech Situation Room, Amazon Prime Day is on July 16th, which is kind of Amazon's way to, well, a couple years ago, it seemed like it was their way to try to clear out terribly unvaluable inventory, but the last couple of years, I've scored really great deals on good stuff. In fact, my Office headphones are a pair of headphones that are way more expensive than the, I think, $60 or $70 I paid for them. But it's on July 16th, and they're starting to become deals now. But there are rumors of not like things like Pixel books, but some of the higher end Chromebooks, the Chromebook for Work 14, which is a beautiful piece of hardware with a 1080p screen. There's a couple of the clear out Samsung Chromebooks that there's been a version 2 of the Chromebook Plus, and the old ones are going to be apparently nearly given away on Prime Day. So July 16th is Amazon Prime Day. So if you want to get your F5 on to see the new deals every hour, apparently there's going to be good stuff on Amazon Prime Day.
There you go. All right. Well, I'll do my Geeks of the Week first. I actually am indulging myself for 3, but these are really quick. Wired Educator is a great podcast by Kelly Croy, and I listened to a really wonderful interview with Wes Molyneux, and it's he's involved in one-to-one, and I love what he says in that podcast about the process that his school went through deciding on a device. When he came to his school, they had been all sold out for Chromebooks, actually, and they went through a process of talking about what do we want to do and how do we want this to transform learning, and they ended up spending time in Chicago at the Google headquarters there, and then with Apple with their briefing center, and have ended up being iPad, but would really commend that to you, and lots of good interviews. On the topic of podcasts, I'm very happy to report that Pocket Cast, which both Jason and I use, has had a really nice upgrade to their sharing feature. And so previously you could just export the OPML file, which is an importable file that has all of the subscription feeds But now, in addition to having that available, they host for you a very nicely formatted page that has the little show art icon and then a link to every single podcast that you subscribe to. So I subscribe to 100 some odd podcasts, and you can use that link to take a look at all of the various and eclectic, we'll say, podcasts that I am still keeping on my device. Not that I'm listening to all of them, certainly not doing that. And then the last thing is Scratch. I'm very proud of my wife. She's been participating much more faithfully in this than I have. There's a great 25 days of Scratch challenges. It's called Getting Unstuck. Just sign up with your email, and the Scratch team sends you a link with a quick challenge, and then there's a gallery where you can submit and share those and be inspired by the creativity of others. So just fantastic for coding. Scratch is MIT's block-based coding environment with millions and millions of projects. My wife's going to be leading 2 different camps next week for younger kids and older kids, still elementary age, but anyway, awesome stuff. Love Scratch and excited to see them doing that and the collaboration that is happening there. Great ways to use technology.
That's great. Thanks for sharing, Wes. I want to share a tip that we mentioned the security reason for this a couple of weeks ago, because there was a number of articles where the FBI suggested that if you hadn't restarted your router lately, you could be part of a cyberbot attack, because I think it was blamed on Russian hackers, which is nowadays the short way of saying international intrigue hackers, right? But international intrigue hackers had compromised a number of routers but only if you hadn't restarted your router. If you restarted your router, it got rid of the nefarious code and you were back to normal again. That's still true, right? If you unplug and plug back in, updates will restart. It'll help get you in the right direction. Wes, it looks like you've got a quick thing to throw in there.
Yeah, I listened to is it Talos, who's the main people with security for Cisco. I listened to a podcast about this. That one, it's a 3-tiered deal. So the firmware gets in there, and then the more nefarious elements of it are a stage 2 and a stage 3. When you reboot, that does take out the stage 2 and the stage 3. But based on what they were saying, rebooting is what the FBI said, and they said they wanted to say something to do some disruption there. But my understanding is you do want to go ahead and refresh to factory settings if you want to flush all of the first tier malware that infests there. But it definitely is a recommended process to do the reboot. And I'll see if I can find that podcast. I think that was from the CyberWire, which is one of those podcasts. But anyway, they're trying to figure this out, right? Because this is like all live new stuff, and the more they disclose, the more they, reveal about how they learn about this stuff and whatnot. But it is kind of crazy. And yeah, how many of us have very old routers, sitting there, and a lot of them, I think they were talking about upwards of 500,000 being compromised. So.
Well, the other piece of information I was going to add into there is that this has happened to me 3 times in 4 weeks, and so I think it's worth mentioning. If you're having problems with downloads on your local network and you have a Wi-Fi router, no matter if it's one of the higher-end ones that kind of updates itself or one of the older ones that relies on you to do so, unplug your router every once in a while and plug it back in. In fact, I would double the advice to say also, if you're using DSL hardware at home, or if you got a cable modem, or something internally in your house, oftentimes those devices do not reset themselves if they have received firmware updates, and oftentimes you can clear caches and do things that are productive speed if you just once in a while unplug them and plug them back in again. That gives them an opportunity to restart and also to start over again. And I had heard this twice, and then I read about an instance of this a couple of weeks ago where folks were running into issues where their wireless network was way slower than the advertised speed from their internet service provider, and the internet service provider came and said there's nothing wrong with anything on our end, and a simple unplugging, waiting for a minute, plugging your wireless router back in made a big difference in the speed inside their house. So it's a simple trick, it's a simple hack. But it's a useful thing to have if you're running into that issue and you're troubleshooting in your home.
And that's become part of my routine before we start the show. Actually, I just did it. Is just unplug the router, let it reboot. Well, actually, unplug the modem I usually do that, but reset it, and then you're hopefully going to be optimizing your speed after it restarts.
Well, Wes, where can the people find you out on the internets?
I continue to be W. Fryer on Twitter, speedofcreativity.org, and my wife and I on Friday will share the second of 3 workshops we're doing this summer called Make Media Camp. And so you can check out what we're doing there at makemediacamp.com. Basically, it's a 1-day version of the 3-day iPad media camps that I've done the last 5 years. We had a good time in Kansas City last Friday. So this next one will just be here in Oklahoma City in 2 days.
Excellent. And I am on Twitter at TechSavvyTeach. I work with the Northwest Council for Computer Education, where I am the TechSavvy administrator. Blog.ncc.org. You can follow them at ncc_edtech. But this whole action here is the EdTech Situation Room podcast, and we're thrilled to bring you each Wednesday night information from technology news through an educational technology lens. You can join us here live by going to our website, which always refers to the YouTube channel, or to our Twitter account, where we tweet out information about our live episode, and you can join us in the chat room and speak with us directly. We even bring in folks as guests occasionally if you're interested in that as well. That's at 8 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 p.m. Central Time, 3 o'clock, we think, in the morning UTC. And then you can always find archives of this each week at our website, where you can find tiny MP3 files, or in your preferred podcatcher, wherever you're currently listening to your podcast. So thank you for listening to episode 100. Here's to 100 episodes more, and we hope that you stay safe and stay savvy. Good night.
Adios.